afternoon and the best time to rest.
right? Yeah, right.
So, to be with us, Father Ted, he is from the Greek Church. He is the pastor of St. Elias in Mississauga. They have a wonderful church, beautiful church. I advise you all to visit it. As beautiful as ours, maybe more. But he's coming to. He also has a YouTube channel called Fr.TEDTalks.
Yeah, it's a rip-off of the TED Talks.
Yeah. So we are blessed to have him among us this afternoon, and please, we hope to you benefit from his presence. We'll start the talk, and after we'll have a Q&A. So thank you, Father Ted. Maybe can you give an applause for me for Father Ted? Say welcome.
Thank you. That's good. Thank you. It's always funny when you apply at the beginning because you don't know if it's going to be good. So. You don't know. But thank you very much, Father. I really appreciate you asking me to come and speak. I'm actually, many of you may not know me, but I've actually come to St. George many, many times, but more in my youth. So when I was younger, we used to come here a lot, different youth activities, and I'm very good friends with Father Skandar, with Brother Alex. I worked with him for many, many years in the camps. Back, I'm older than I look, so it's, so we did. I had Brother Alex come up to Winnipeg when I used to be in Winnipeg. So so a lot of connections with St. George Antiochian, and we love this church. So thank you very much. It's my first time speaking here officially.
And thank you to Peter prepared the connections and prepared the talk.
Thank you. So I was asked to come and speak about raising kids in the Orthodox Church in the faith. I called it the kids in the kingdom. I thought it was witty, but maybe not. Who knows? But it is something that's very dear to my heart because I have 3 children myself. I have twins, George and Katerina, who are now almost 13, and then I have another son, Angelo, who is 9.5 now. So I have my own children, kind of raising them in the faith, and the difficulties and the challenges of that. And I'm sure all of you, some of you have kids, some of you don't have kids. Lots of kids here as well. So maybe you'll benefit from some of this as well, but it's more directed towards your parents and to the older ones here, just kind of as far as what we'll be talking about. But I don't know. I was talking about it at my church today as well. Since I was coming here, I'm like, might as well tell my own people what I'm going to talk about in the sermon in an abbreviated version. But raising kids in the faith is kind of interesting because I started off kind of today, and I was telling my parish, that because we have like a pretty big Sunday school. Do you guys have a Sunday school here? Yeah? Is it good? Kids? You better say it's good. Your parents are watching. So we have a Sunday school. Is there like a youth group here as well? A youth group, Sunday school, different programs in the church, right? And I was telling my people today at my church that, because we have the luxury of having these really wonderful programs here in North America, in Canada, we have these beautiful churches. We're pretty organized, not like the old days, right? But the downside to having all these programs is that I think that what's happened is over the years is that parents, and I'm not knocking individual parents, but generally, as a general statement, parents kind of have slowly over the years relegated the responsibility of raising their children in the faith to programs or to institutions, right? So, the Sunday school will teach my children how to pray. The youth group will teach my kids about, fellowship and things like that. The church is going to teach my kids about, the services and things like that, right? I don't really have to do much about it. And I know that this is happening. I can speak from the Greek Orthodox side, but, the Antiochian, the Greeks were pretty similar, very similar. I would say out of all the jurisdictions, the most similar. So I venture to guess that it's probably around the same kind of problems and things happening between the jurisdictions. I remember when I was in Winnipeg, which was my first parish, back in 2008, in my first couple of years there, I remember my Sunday school teacher once, she came to my office, she was really upset. She said, this mother came into my class at the end of school, and she started kind of angry and yelling at me, saying, my son doesn't know the Our Father, the Lord's Prayer. What kind of Sunday school are you running here? That's what the mother said to my Sunday school director. And my Sunday school director's response was, well, do you do it at home with your kid? And the mother's like, that's not my responsibility. So I remember this because it's happened other times too, but this was kind of like the first time I remember when I was a young priest that this happened. And I was like, wow, this mother felt that it was the Sunday school's job when her kid was finally old enough to get to school, which is after 4 or 5 years old, to learn the Lord's Prayer, which is crazy when you think about it, because it's not only is it too late, of course, to teach our children the Lord's Prayer, but even like expecting someone else other than the parent to do those things is, I think, a little crazy, right? But it's kind of like we fall into it, I think, because we have sometimes really great institutions. We have a great Sunday school, great. Then the Sunday school teachers will take care of it. I don't have to worry about it. So many times I have parents who come and tell me, I really don't know the answers, Father. So I send my kids to the Sunday school teacher, or I send my kids to like a YouTube channel, or I send kids to your YouTube channel, whatever. So that's not a good answer. So, one of the quotes that I was thinking about this week when I was kind of prepping for this talk was something that St. Porphyrio said. St. Porphyrio said, if you want to raise saints, you need to be saints first, yourselves. And that's like a really hard thing to kind of digest, because that means, what does that mean for me? Like, I have to be a good Orthodox Christian? This is very hard, right? So, if you want your kids to pray, you have to pray. If you want your kids to go to church, you have to go to church, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It starts with the adults, right? And generally speaking, wherever parents are serious about their faith, like really serious about their faith, and they truly live it, and I'm not just talking about going to church on Sundays, but praying at home, having icons in the rooms, which I don't even find anymore, unfortunately, or having a prayer corner, praying before meals or after meals, doing these kind of things. When the parents take it seriously, generally speaking, the kids also take it seriously. When the parents don't take it seriously, or when there's a disconnect between what's happening in the church and what's happening at home, that's usually where the problems start, right? So, a lot of times people blame the kids, but I don't want to talk about the kids at all. Sorry, kids. Because the kids are usually pretty wonderful. There are exceptions. But generally speaking, the kids are pretty wonderful, right? It is the parents that are usually like, again, not coming down hard, but it's us. We are the ones who are failing a lot of times, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen this in the Antiochian Church, St. George, but I've seen parents, pull up to the church on a Sunday, drop their kids off at Sunday school, and then go to Starbucks. Have you ever seen this phenomenon before? I've noticed it. It's happened many times, right? I've seen it in multiple churches, right? And they'll like pick up my kid afterwards, right? Or I've had like situations where the parents, like the Sunday school so much that they want to make sure that the Sunday school is happening during liturgy. Why? Anyone guess? No? Yeah, babysitting, right? I don't want my kid in liturgy with me. It's annoying. I have to watch them now. I watch them all week. I want to go and enjoy my liturgy. So the Sunday school is great because it takes my child somewhere else. That's why a lot of times we run Sunday schools during the Divine Liturgy, which is also, it kind of shows you how we think about education in the church, right? And don't get me wrong, my church is guilty of this as well. Prophet Elias is guilty of it. I'm fairly new at Prophet Elias. I've been there for about just over a year and a half. It runs during Divine Liturgy, right? My previous churches never ran during Divine Liturgy. It was always ran after Divine Liturgy. But it kind of tells you, like, and when you try to like switch these things, there's pushback from the parents. The parents are like, no, I don't want that because I don't want my kids, disrupting the nice, quiet, or, beautiful liturgy. I don't want to have to run after my kids, right? So we'll get to that. Like whether we should be doing that or not. So really, like, just because as an intro, the question is, if we're going to talk about raising children in the church, we have to talk about what kind of people are we first. Like, what kind of Christian am I as a human being? How much do I love my faith? How much do I love Christ? And what do I do on a daily basis, right? What is my routine? Do I pray? Do I fast? Do I take these things seriously? I may not be perfect, but do I actually believe in these things, right? What kind of marriage do I have? These are kind of questions we don't think about when we think about raising children in the church. And what do I mean by that? Like, what's my relationship with my spouse, with my husband or my wife? Do we have a good relationship? Do we have a bad relationship? Is there fighting in the home, right? Do we have an Orthodox, like both parents are Orthodox? Is it a mixed marriage? Is it Orthodox with Catholic, Orthodox Protestant? That exists as well, right? I don't know how it is in the Antiochian, but like the Greek, we're almost a 50% mix now. Big switch in the demographics, right? So the dynamics in a household is different when one parent is Orthodox and one parent is not Orthodox, right? Is the non-Orthodox parent, do they exist? Are they supportive of the Orthodox education of the child? Are they not? Is there sharing of the kids, jumping between two churches? These are all factors that exist, within the church, and it's not something that we should be afraid to talk about. These things are happening, right? So all these things are factors, right? And so, like, going back to that mother that said, the Sunday school didn't teach my child the creed, or the Lord's Prayer, or the creed for that matter. The thing is that, like, if you've been saying it with your baby, even if you've been saying it yourself when your baby was in your womb, the baby could hear it, right? So just even the sound of the words is familiar, right? This is where it starts. It starts all the way from back there. So I kind of separated kind of like education into three kind of, I guess you could say, age groups that I want to talk about. One is like, the years, the first 1 to 4. So, the preschool years, right, before you go to school. And then I'll talk a little bit about like 5 to 12, a kind of middle time when you're like going from beginning of school to preteen, right? And then talk a little bit about like 13 to 18, which is like some people think they're the crazy years, but they're not, right? As they come into adulthood, young adulthood, right? So the first years, right? 0, let's say, to 4, let's say, or 3 or 4, because kids go sometimes to preschool, maybe at 3. I don't know, when does preschool start? 3, 4. 4 is JK now, right? So 4, you can get them into JK, and 5 is usually, so 4 or 5 is when kids usually start school. So, what is the general consensus with young parents who have babies, right? Is it easy to go to church with a baby? I'm actually asking. Sorry, don't you? It's easy? Yeah? You find it easy? Okay, so they're babies, they have no will, they have no opinion. Up to a certain amount of months, right? So maybe, 1 to 6 months, they have no opinion, right? Maybe, okay, but when you start hitting, 10 months, 12 months, they start walking, they start getting, louder voices, right? It gets a little harder, right? So, okay, I get it. When they're newborns, it's easy. You bring them in the bucket seat. My poor wife, we had twins in Winnipeg. We didn't have any family, and she had to carry, both, and we didn't even have an elevator in our building, so we had to have parishioners come and help her every Sunday because I couldn't help her because I was at the church. It was horrible for her, right? So yeah, but once they get a little bit more, older, especially when they start walking, it gets more difficult. Yes, for those of you who have raised children, right? So what I find a lot of parents tell me is that they don't want to go to church during those years, not because only it's exhausting for them, but they're afraid they're going to ruin the experience for other people. This is the number one, complaint or fear that parents tell me. They say, Father, my kid's like 2, the terrible 2s. They're not going to sit for an hour, let alone an hour and a half or 2 hours in liturgy. I can't keep them quiet. My church doesn't have a children's room, crying room, whatever. But even if they do, like, they bust out of it, so I get the old ladies looking at me, they turn around, they say, shh, they make me feel bad because my kids are disrupting the divine liturgy, right? Maybe the priest, I don't know, like sometimes we priests, we're not very smart about it. Maybe we like, oh, shh, quiet down your kids, I'm trying to pray. So there's all these factors and people are kind of afraid. And so there's this phenomenon that people, when they have their babies between 1 and 4, they seldom take them to church. They stay away because they don't want all these problems, right? Do you guys see this at all here? Okay, so you see it. Not everybody, but I think there's a significant amount of people who do this, right? So the problem with this is that if you look at like developmental psychology, human beings, they form their core personality in the first 4 years, right? So the person you're going to be is not when you go to school. Like, yeah, you might change, you're going to get more knowledge, things like that. But like the core, we're talking about like ethics, morality, what's right, what's wrong, identifying what love is, affection, right? Anger, all these things, right? The belief in God, even though you can't articulate it at that age, but like the idea of God existing, like there is a God, right? Or no God. That's instilled in us in the first 4 years, right? So this is like, it's the most crucial time of like the development of the person's core personality, which is the thing that's going to carry you through the rest of your life. You might change, as we said. People do change, but there are some core tenets that don't. So, that's like the first seed that goes in, right? So those first 4 years, it's like the kid comes out and they're like an empty glass, and now you got to fill it with something. So what are you going to fill it with? So if people are not going to church during those first 3-4 years, or it's devoid of the church community, well, then they're devoid of God. And there might be some prayer at home, but that's a big piece of the family, of the religious experience, the Orthodox experience of life that is absent from that child. And then when they say, okay, now my kid is 4, they start to go to preschool or they're going to JK, now I'm going to put them in Sunday school because they'll accept them. And now they're going to get their religion, right? And it's like, but there's this void now. And I see it all the time. I see these kids coming in to our kindergarten programs in Sunday school, and they don't know anything. Like, they don't even know how to do the cross, right? And it's really hard because they're at that age where it hasn't been instilled in them. So it's like you're trying to start from scratch, but they've already been pre-programmed now with a bunch of other stuff. Because if you're not filling that glass, that empty glass, with Christ, it's going to get filled by something else. And it's going to be filled by TV, the iPad, other things, right? It's just not going to be faith, right? So you're going to fill it with something. So those first 3-4 years are so crucial. And the biggest mistake, I would say, and I would say, like, that's, if you're going to take one thing away from this talk, is the biggest mistake is not taking your kids to church consistently when they're babies, when they're infants. Because we assume they don't understand. Yeah, they have no will. Oh, they have a will. they know, right? Just like when people say, oh, babies are so innocent, they're so sinless. No, babies are the most selfish creatures in the world. They're so sinful. They may not be sinful like on purpose, but it's me. Babies, children are like the most selfish people, right? Like, oh, they're sinful. They're completely acting according to their nature, like it's to their fallen nature. They have no way of like even controlling their passions, right? But the babies, assuming that they don't understand is like the biggest mistake we make, and then we don't kind of place those seeds in them from the beginning. I remember when my kids were growing up, and I've seen this in other children, but it really struck me with my twins. When they were just over 1 year old, like my twins started walking a little late. They started walking like 13 months, 14 months. So just over a year. And yet a year, they don't even have a very big vocabulary. They have like, how many words, right? So they're barely speaking. They still don't know a lot of things. They're just starting to walk, right? So I remember my kids, anything that had to do with church, they couldn't say church, or they couldn't say ecclesia in Greek, or whatever, but they said Aios. Aios is holy, right? So Aios o Theos, we say, right? So they learned that word, and so anytime they saw a crucifix, Aios. They saw their dad dressed up like a priest, Aios, right? They saw an icon, Aios, right? That's just that's their word that they had at 1 year old for whatever was, religious, Christian, right? But they understood that at 1 year old, even though they only had like 10 words in vocabulary or whatever it was. And they don't understand at 1 year old, like calendars. They don't know it's Tuesday. They don't have a concept of that, right? But interestingly enough, I remember we're living in this little apartment. We're still living in a little apartment, but anyways. And on Sundays, the little ones, they would they would walk to the door. They would point to the door and they would say, Aios. Only on Sundays. That's interesting. At 1 year old. No one told them it's Sunday. No one said we're going to church. Like I'm talking about early in the morning, before I even left for church, they would point to the door and they would say Aios, which means they knew something was going on, even at 1 year old. They had like this, because it was a routine, because they were going every Sunday. So somehow, even biologically, they knew 7 days had gone by, the cycle, right? And it was ingrained in them, and they would say the word every Sunday morning. Isn't that weird? Like, so even before they could even conceptualize it properly or to even like express it, right? So kids know. And enculturation is the most important thing, right? So we think they're not watching, or we think they're just kind of, they're small and they're dumb and they don't know anything, right? But they know. And even if they can't articulate it yet, it's ingrained in them. And then it becomes, in Greek we say synethia, it becomes a habit, but not like in a bad way. It's a good habit to have, right? And so kids know. And so, that's what I would say, like in those first 4 formational years, you gotta, I hate to say this, you gotta take one for the team. Right? What does that mean? It means you're not going to enjoy church. Church is probably going to be horrible. I'm not going to lie to you, parents. Especially mothers, because let's face it, guys. I don't know how many guys are active. How How many Arab guys are active with the kids? Yeah, they are. Okay, that's pretty good. Good. I'm active with my kids, but the mothers get the brunt of it, and and it's horrible, right? So that's the second point. So the first thing is we said we have to keep them going to church even though it's hard. We don't have to. We shouldn't worry about people not liking us because our kid is there and making noise, right? But the third thing is that it's not supposed to be fun. So going back to that point I said about parents saying, I like the Sunday school being run during liturgy because it's babysitting. Your liturgy is not supposed to be fun or even enjoyable for those years that you're at the childbearing years. I hate to say it. It's supposed to be hard, arduous, difficult work because what you're doing is you're sacrificing your own spiritual time, which shouldn't be just on Sundays. It should be at home as well. When your kids go to bed, when you can pray with your husband, when you can actually pray, right? But you're sacrificing your liturgy time for those years for the sake of your children. It's a sacrifice. You're not supposed to have a good time. Because sometimes your kids, it's true, they can't make it through a whole liturgy, which means you might have to leave early or you might have to go late just for the sake of having them there, which I would advocate for. Some people say, well, Father, you're telling us, to go to church late. I'm like, no, not if you can help it. But if it means either not going at all or going for an hour or going for 30 minutes, you go for those 30 minutes because it's better than nothing. I had a couple at my previous church, wonderful people, Albanian Orthodox, who had this beautiful son, Miron, and he was autistic, right? And he was more on the extreme end, right? So very, very difficult behaviorally, right? So when he was a little baby, he just couldn't function, especially in crowds, right? So it was a nightmare for them, right? To bring him to church, and they lived in Milton, okay? So, but they would come every Sunday. And they would come for 20 minutes. Just for 20 minutes. That's all they could handle. That's all he could handle, right? And they would do it. So they would come 20 minutes before Holy Communion. And it wasn't because they wanted to be lazy. They just, right? And they just did it over and over again. And it was really, really bad for them. I remember because when I was there for 8.5 years. So I saw him grow. But the seeds that they planted was amazing because that struggle, now he's in his teens. He's still obviously he's still autistic, but in church he's calm. It's the only place he's calm, right? And after a few years, he loves the church. The church is the calming place for him. Goes up, takes communion on his own, doesn't have any problems, doesn't make any noise. It took a long time to train, but how beautiful is that now, right? A lot of times we would just be like, this is too stressful. I'm not even gonna do this, right? And that's like a little bit of an extreme example. But this is what it takes. So I always laugh and joke, but not like in a mean way. But my wife, she hadn't enjoyed liturgy for 7 years because she had the twins, and then by the time they get stable enough, then we had a third one. It's a long time where you're trying to rein them in, and you're trying to help them, and you're showing them the icons, and you're trying to engage them, in things that they can at least focus on during liturgy, so that they're not bored, but at the same time they're learning. So you take them to the candles, you show them how to light a candle, or you walk around and show them the icons, how to kiss the icons, or this and that. It's because they can't just sit there, right? So yeah, it's not supposed to be fun, and that's okay. That's what part of being a parent is, being selfless, right, and sacrificing everything for your children, right? So yeah, you're not supposed to enjoy liturgy. That's my message for that one. So that's as far as the first 3-4 years, I think that's the most important thing that I would say. It's just consistency, bringing the child to church, being with you, doing the things yourself. So doing your cross, kissing the icons, doing it with them so they watch you. Right? That's the last thing as far as that. This is for all time periods, but especially now, the other phenomenon that we have is that once you baptize your child, right? What is the phenomenon? Parents bring their babies, right, to commune. And what do? Commune my child. But they don't commune. How often do the parents commune with the baby? Not much. At least in my experience with the Greeks. Send the kids ahead, right? Or even godparents. They bring the godparent, the godchild. The godchild communes, but the godparent doesn't commune. Have you seen this? You notice the trend? Right? So I would say it's like, no, you should commune before your kid. There's a hierarchy in the family. Kids don't go first, parents go first. There's a reason for that, because the child needs to see mommy and daddy commune so they know it's okay. They see mommy and daddy do it, and they're like, oh, okay, this crazy guy with a big beard is trying to feed me something, right? It's like, it's not so scary if they see mommy and daddy do it first, right? So the parents should actually be communing first all the time, then the children. Just like in the home, the parents are at the top, and then there's a pyramid, right? And then there's the kids are below, right? Not the other way around. But we always put the kids in the front, and we wonder why they're freaking out. And they never see mommy and daddy commune, right? So a lot of times they're coming up in the liturgy. Even today, we had a lot of commune today. It was like really long. That's why I was late. I'm sorry every time. I was alone too, and we were communing. It's like they're bringing the baby, and the baby's freaking out. I'm like, okay, well, like just watch daddy do it, or watch mommy. And the parents look at me like, no, I'm not taking communion because they're not prepared, right? And I'm like, well, next time, prepare yourself, commune first, right? And your child will follow. And every time they do it, they actually listen to the advice and they do it, it works. Because the kids are like, oh, this is something that mommy and daddy do, right? So if mommy and daddy do it, we're going to do it too, right? If mommy and daddy don't do it, chances are the kids are going to figure that out really quickly, right? Or if only mommy does it and daddy doesn't, or the other way around sometimes, right? It's the other phenomenon, right? Only one parent is active and the other one is not. Again, right? And here's another bad statistic, a scary statistic. Moms can take kids to church all they want, but statistically speaking, if fathers don't go to church, kids are 60% less likely to be religious when they grow up. And it doesn't work the other way around. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying I understand the statistic. What I'm telling, well, I have some thoughts, but for some reason, study after study show that the male being religious plays a larger impact on the child's life than the female. But it's usually the mother who's doing it, or the grandmother, right? And the men usually don't go to church a lot. They do, but you know what I mean, statistically speaking, right? The men go to church less than the mothers, right? So the mothers are doing all this hard work, bringing the children to church, trying to do the best, right? And the dad is not going, right, for whatever reason. The kid is still not going to be religious when they grow up, at least 60% less likely to. But when both parents go, and especially the male is going, that number skyrockets, right? Kids are much more likely to stay involved in the church because the male, psychologically speaking, is the authoritarian. The mother's the nurturer. You need both, of course, right? But it's almost like people expect the woman to be religious from a sociological point of view. They don't expect the male to be. And yet we have a male priesthood. Isn't that weird? Weird, huh? I was like, what are you, don't say these things. Yeah, well, these are things, you asked me to come. I told you, don't clap at the beginning. But, you have to talk about these things. We're okay so far? How are we doing with time? Okay. Well, we're actually quite late. Okay, I'll move on a little more. Okay. So that was years 1 to 4. So moving on to like the actual school years, which I kind of touched on already. Again, expectations of institutions should not be too high, not because we shouldn't have wonderful Sunday schools. We should, but they're not the be-all and end-all of your kids' upbringing. How long do we have your kids? 40 minutes? Half an hour on a Sunday school? A week? Maybe, if you're lucky, right? How long do you have them at home? In contrast, right? So if you're waiting for the Sunday school to teach your kids religion, forget about it. If you're waiting for the priest to teach your kids religion, forget about it. Not because he's not doing his job, but because he doesn't see them. The priest is not with your children all week. The priest, they're going to see him for an hour on Sunday, right? Maybe, right? So they're not going to see him all the time. It's not his job to raise your kids in the Orthodox faith. It's his job to teach you to raise your kids in the Orthodox faith. That's the priest's job. Right? Just like the Sunday school teachers, I always say the Sunday school teachers are like your wingman. They're like there to support you because you are the first catechists at home. Grandma, grandpa, mom, and dad are the first priests. All of you, right? You need to be experts in your faith. You have to know your faith. You have to know why we do things. If you don't know, you need to open a book or look at a YouTube video. Thank God we got so many resources right now, which we'll talk about later. You need to be, you're the first point of contact. Right? And I would say that, like, when a parent, it's not bad to say, for a parent to say, I don't know an answer. Out of humility, it's good once in a while. But generally speaking, you should know. Kids, like, look to their parents and they say, Mommy and Daddy, they want to know. They want to know the answer to things, right? So when the parents don't know all the time, it sends a message to the kids. It sends a message that when it comes to this topic, it's not important. Because if it's important, you'd know, right? So if Dad is into football and the kid can ask Dad about football and Dad knows all the statistics and all the players, but then he asks him, like, a little bit about, like, oh, Dad, why do we fast on Wednesdays and Fridays? Well, it's not the fact that he doesn't know that is the bad thing. It's the message that is sent to the child that, well, obviously that's not that important to my parent because they don't know, and therefore religion is optional. This is the optics. Like, this is like what the child gets, right? Whereas if the parent is excited and says, oh, well, we fast on Wednesdays because this is the betrayal of Judas, right? And on Friday, it's the crucifixion, and we commemorate those days by fasting. Well, that's interesting, right? Let's sit down and talk about it, right? So these are, like, the excitement that a parent can have is going to be passed on to the child, right? So if you're expecting the Sunday school to do that, it's not going to happen. Some Sunday schools are great. Some Sunday schools are not so great. It doesn't matter. I hate to say it. It doesn't mean that they're irrelevant. It's just they're secondary to the main thing, right? Like, as I said, in the old days in the village, they didn't have Sunday schools. They didn't have youth groups. Who raised the children? Parents, the grandparents, the family. They didn't have anybody else. So that's, like, the most important thing, right? So expectations from institutions, I think, is a little too high, I think, right? We expect other people to always do the job for us, right? And thank God, now there's no excuses. Like, we have everything in our pocket, and we don't do it. We don't need to go to a library. You have all the fathers in English for free, like, on apps now. We have Orthodox apps that have all the prayers in there. We have, like, so much stuff, like, so many theologians on YouTube. Like, you can learn anything. Like, if you don't know, it's like, okay, son or daughter, I don't know this answer. 1 sec. It's there. You can find out why you fast on Wednesday and Fridays, like, in 3 seconds. And we still don't do it, which is weird. Right? So it's not hard, right? So those schooling years, like, if you get through the formative years, the first 4 years, and the kids have been going to church, I think you've won half the battle. If you've just taken them those years, you've instilled in them, you've put in, like, deep seeds that are starting to grow now. This is very good, right? If you haven't done that, you're already behind the game. Like, you're far behind. So, like, half the game is those first 4 years. After that, 5 to 12 years old, it's good to have them involved in programs. But let's say you're in a community, a smaller community somewhere, like rural Canada or whatever, you might not have that. That's fine. You can still have, as long as you have a strong spiritual life at home, right? This is enough for our kids to grow, right? Because they have those strong roots, right? And so, like, the expectations, I think, are a little too high, and we have to remember that we have to be the first catechists. The 13 to 18 is interesting. So the last kind of, when they're going into, like, teens and then young adulthood, right? I think this is where we have a lot of discussions, like, in youth ministry about this, like youth groups and bridge programming and, young adult leagues and all these acronyms that we come up with because we want to have, like, more programs, right? But I would say, because I've been doing youth for a long time. I was the national youth director for quite a few years for our archdiocese. I've been involved with our Camp Metamorphosis, our summer camps that we have. We have a pretty strong camp program in our archdiocese. All that kind of stuff. The Antiochians have a wonderful camp program as well. And actually, the Antiochians, I would say, have a stronger youth program than the Greeks do. Like, as far as the North American youth board and things like that. I had Father Joseph Papura as an instructor in my doctorate at St. Vlad's, so I'm very familiar with the Antiochian system, which is better, in my opinion. And one thing that the Antiochian Church is doing much better than the Greeks are doing, and by better I mean they have it and we don't have anything, is this idea of mentorship, right? I don't know if you do it here, but there has been a program from the archdiocese, the Antiochian Archdiocese, of this idea that teens and then young adults, they're not just youth in the parish. They're at an age now where, okay, we've raised them in the church, they've been coming to liturgy, they've been involved in the programs, things like that. Okay, but now you're a teen and you're coming slowly, 13, 14, 15, 16, you're starting to become an adult, right? A young adult, right? We're not going to wait until they're 20. When you're 19, when you're 20, when you're 22, whatever. Now these days it's 30 and 40, whatever. Then you can like get involved in the church. No, it's like you should, like Father Joseph would tell us, it's like you should try to push the younger teens to start taking ownership of the community, right? Like I loved it, was that your Peter? I came in, I saw Peter's daughter in the back wiping down the tables in the kitchen, right? I'm like, that's awesome. It's like, it's great, right? Like cleaning up, like taking ownership, actually doing stuff, right? You don't see in my church, you don't see those kids do that. It's the older ladies doing it, but like the kids are not doing anything. They're just running around crazy, right? It's like you have to take ownership of your community, right? So as you become a young adult, part of it is taking responsibility for your own community. This includes, of course, simple things like cleaning, which sounds like a mundane thing, but taking care of your church, like actually taking care of the space, vacuuming, cleaning, things like that. Doing volunteer work within the parish, helping out on the board, even as a junior member, things like that. These things are really, really important because who's going to take over? Like when everybody else is gone, right? We assume they're going to take over, but not if they disengage and they're gone, right? So, ownership of the church and understand that the church is your home and it's your responsibility is a huge thing. But mentorship is this kind of like bridging the gap between the elderly and the young, right? So this is a big problem at least within the Greek jurisdiction, where the old people don't talk to the young kids, except their own grandchildren, right? But in the parish, how often do the little kids, the younger kids, speak to the elderly? Does it happen? I don't know. Does it happen here? Like in coffee hour, do little kids speak to old people? Why not? Why not? No, it's something like, the elderly have a lot of wisdom, right? So we understand this, we recognize this, right? And it's not just your grandparents, like your immediate grandparents, but there's other elders in the church. And the elders in the church, it's kind of like, okay, the elders are over here, and then you have the adults, it's like, middle-aged, whatever, or young parents, and then you have the kids. But why don't the kids ever speak to the elderly? Or ask them questions? Or why don't we facilitate discussions in this way to learn more about things from the older generation? Or even to learn, to hear their experiences about the church, right? We don't even do that with young kids or let's say teenagers. We don't even do that with teenagers and like actual board members, like just middle-aged people. Like when do kids ever discuss like something that we're trying to do at Prophet Elias now is like we're trying to do one session which has never been done before. It's like get the younger youth to come and have a session with one or two of our board members, talk about parish finances. Sounds so exciting, right? But it's actually fascinating because kids have no concept about what it takes to keep a church going. Like the teens they just think, oh, the lights just turn on. And they have no concept about what the board members do to keep the doors open. How do you pay your bills? How do you just the nitty gritty of it? I'm not saying we're going to sit there and do a massive economic session, explain to them, but it's good for them to have an idea, at least in the teens. Okay, this is what's going on with your parents when they're going to those board meetings, or they're staying late to count the money, or they're doing this, doing that, or making decisions on how to fix the roof because it collapsed, right? These are real life problems within the church, and I think the teens should know these things so they can really appreciate what their parents are doing on the board, right? And also appreciate what the elderly did to get that church going in the past. But they have no concept of those things. Like, how do you keep a church going? What does it cost? What is the overhead on the church? These things sound like everyday things, but they're really, really important, right? And they have a spiritual dimension to them because we got to think about them. The priest needs to think about them. The president needs to think about them. And, I don't know if you have a women's auxiliary here, or any philanthropic group within the church. They have to think about it. So it's these things, we don't think about these things as raising youth, but bridging the gap between, adolescence and then and adulthood. I think it's not happening within the church at all. And then we wonder why they disengage, right? And I understand that sometimes the older generation is well, they're just kids. They're not responsible enough, so we don't want to give them any responsibility, right? That happens, of course. I guess it's normal, but it is something that I think is driven by an estrangement If the elderly don't speak to the young people, then they're just young people. If the young people don't speak to the elderly, then they're just old people. But if you get to know the kids, it's like, what would be bad to have, like, a few of the grandmas come in and speak to the youth class and tell them about their stories about when they first started the church here. You might find some interesting things, right? It sounds boring, but it's not, right? Or have the kids ask them stories, just like they ask their grandparents sometimes, right? So mentoring is a big part, right? I always used to, when we were growing up, we always heard the saying, the youth are the future. You guys have that? Youth of the future, right? I don't like that saying. It's like it's a bad saying, the youth of the future. Why is it bad? Can anyone tell me why it's bad to say that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's the problem with the future? It's not real. It hasn't happened yet. It's fake. It's like it's a figment of our imagination, right? It hasn't happened yet. It doesn't mean anything. The future is going to come one day, okay. But the present is the most important thing, because the present is the only time that actually exists, right? So when you say the youth of the future, what are you kind of saying? You're saying, well, the youth are not, they're not in my reality right now. Yeah, not important right now. Yeah. They'll be important one day when we get around to it. And so we say things like that because we think we're honoring the youth, but we're not, right? And so again, it's this idea that, having the youth are not something that they're going to grow into one day. They are an integral part of the church right now. Just like there's a head, there's fingers, there's feet, right? Everybody's an integral part. So the youth have something to do right now. It's not like we're going to see you as something you're going to do. One day you'll grow up and you'll be contributing members of the church. No, they're contributing members right now. They can do things right now, right? They're not something to be put on the side until later, right? And so we think about it that way, and then that's, again, part of what drives this kind of, I would say, dysfunction in the church, that we don't have this proper kind of relationship with the younger people, right? So this happens a lot. Like the teens, that's why the teens, they tend to congregate with themselves, and they don't congregate with the rest of the congregation, with the rest of the group of the rest of the community, right? They want to hang with themselves because they understand each other. And also, do the adults really care about us? Not really that much. Or they don't care about what we're doing. And is there much for me to do at the church right now? Mm-hmm. Is there much for you to do at the church? Yeah? What are you doing at the church? They put you to work, huh? Your daughter? Well, okay. I picked the wrong, I'm sorry. I picked the priest kid, I'm sorry. Okay, what about you kids over there? You guys have any serious, important roles in the church right now? Anything? No? I'm putting you on the spot. It's okay. Like, are you expected to do anything when you come here? Like doing work, or you have a role to play, except just showing up? Sorry? Listen to prayers, yeah. But I mean, like, do they need you to do anything else? Yeah? Serving the altar. Okay, that's good. Go to Sunday school. Okay. Chanting. That's good. All right. Chanting's good. What about the girls? No. Ushering. Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but he's soil board members.
Okay. So what do you do?
I don't know. I'm not one of them.
Okay. We have a very important youth board. I hear it's amazing. Well, I don't go to it. It's funny. Maybe you should go to it. Why don't you go to it?
I did, but I didn't get picked.
You didn't get picked? Oh. Oh, for the actual board. But there's a group though, right? There's more people. So you can still go to the group. Oh, you're in that. You're just not on the executive. Okay, I'm sorry, just making sure. Yeah. That's okay. But that's good though. It's like positions like that are good because it teaches you responsibility, right? You take responsibility for your church. So yeah, like these are the kind of things, like I'm a firm believer that, we talk about just kind of wrapping it up a bit because we're getting past it. Okay. I want to give time for Q&A too. We're in the kingdom, yes. It got extended after the Afghon, yeah. When I first started out, kind of just to bring it back to the beginning, when I first started out, especially in youth work, because I was doing youth work before I became a priest. And then, of course, as a young priest, what do the bishops do? You're a young priest. You understand the youth. Okay, maybe. And I was in youth work. I used to think in the same way. I used to think, well, we gotta craft the best programs. Like we can just make the best programs for youth. Then we'll bring the kid we'll draw the youth in, right? So if we have a really good youth group, and if we have like a really charismatic youth leader, or maybe your charismatic priest, the cool priest, all these kind of things that I thought were smart, and they weren't. And through trial and error, like I've been a priest now 17 years, and it's not a long time, but it's a long time, it's just the programs are good, but as I get older and as I see more and more of the kind of youth ministry within the church and kind of coming into a different era now, we're in 2024. Back then it was a different time, like in the early 2000s. And when I grew up, like in the 90s, let's say, with youth groups and how they were, it was a different time. As I see more and more that like the programs aren't going to save us. They're not. Like there's no perfect program, and programs do not replace good family. They just don't. Good parents, good grandparents, prayer in the home, living your faith and modeling it, mentoring it to your children, both in the home and also mentoring within the parish, the older generation to the younger. Nothing beats that. Anytime I've seen it, I've served 3 parishes now, and anytime that's happening, then you have youth staying involved. Anytime that's not happening, the youth take a hike. When they hit 16, they're gone. They say that's 60%, which these days is worse, I think. It's gone up. But the general number is 60% leave at 16 years old, and out of that 60%, 60 of it don't come back. So it's not good numbers, right? But I think it's worse. So ironically, if you're going to take anything away from it, is that, youth work, the big part of it is focusing on adults. It's kind of counterintuitive, but that's what it is. That's what it is. It's our faith is a mature faith, right? It's not a faith in the sense that you grow into your faith, into maturity, right? Little kids can't understand the Trinity, things like that. They grow into it, right? So you sow the seeds and then you grow into it. You grow into spiritual maturity, right? So it takes spiritually mature people to guide the neophytes, the little plants, but you have to be spiritually mature yourself. And so a parish that has really good like adult religious education usually has strong youth. A parish that doesn't have anything for adults, like to help them grow in their faith, usually they could have 50,000 programs for the youth. You're putting the cart before the horse. It's backwards. So it's like the parents don't know anything, or the grandparents don't know anything, or know little. You can have the best Sunday school program, best youth program, whatever. The parents, the ones who are leaders in the household, they're going to counteract everything you're doing. They're going to almost like sabotage it inadvertently, right? We used to have this problem with camp. I did camp for 20 years, Camp Metamorphosis. And what did we find? We'd bring the kids out to the bush, take away their cell phones, brainwash them Orthodox for a week, right? It was awesome. It still happens. It's still great, right? But what happens is that we take the kids, they live together like a commune, like in the cabins there. We do matins in the morning. All the kids would read it in English. It was amazing. They would read Vespers every night. We would do unction. We would do Paraclesis, the Virgin Mary, do all these amazing things, right? And they'd be unplugged. And they'd finish the week, and we'd give them the services because they were so enthused because they really got a lot out of it, right? And they really had energy and like zeal for their faith after just 1 week, right? And they'd be like, yes, I'm going to go home and I'm going to do this with my parents. Nope. Almost every child, they go home and the parents like, I'm not doing that. And it just killed their whole zeal. The parents killed the zeal. And then the kids come back the year after and they're like, oh, okay, I'm back now. This is great. But at home, there's nothing like that. And then the kids have this weird dichotomy. They're like, well, I have this amazing spiritual experience at camp, but then I go home and there's nothing going on there. My parents are not interested in these kinds of things. They're working hard, they're doing all these other things. Doesn't mean they're horrible parents. But when it comes to the spiritual side of it, there's nothing there, right? So it sabotages, like it kind of counteracts everything we just tried to do for a week or 2 weeks or whatever you're going to do, right? Right? Kids go to Antiochian Village, they have a wonderful time. They come home and it's like, there's no prayer at home. But they were just doing prayer twice a day at the village, right? Like, so it's like, this is the problem, right? So, but if the parents were reinforcing that, could you imagine like the effect it would have? It's like the camp is like a booster, like it gives them like a kick to go even further in their faith, and they go back home and they just run with it, right? But if the parents are not working with you, right? So these are the things, and I noticed this, for example, even in Winnipeg when my first parish, that like it was my first church. I was a young priest, and we had a youth group, we had all that kind of stuff. but I really focused on adult religious education. I did like this program called Catechism, and it was like basically an adult discussion group, right? And I actually tracked, like I had numbers for this, like metrics, and I tracked like the parents who were going to the Catechism sessions over the course of 6 years that I was there, and then I tracked their children. And the ones who didn't go to religious, like adult religious education, the parents, the kids, it was predictable. They're the ones who disengaged. They left during university, never came back, right? But almost all the parents who were in Catechism, all their kids stayed involved all the way through university. They would come to church, which is unheard of. They would go to church every Sunday, even when they were in university, right? Which you never get. So why is that? Right? We didn't do anything special with the youth group, but the parents were engaged, right? So the parents, they would go to church and they would hear the sermon, and then when they would go home, they would talk about the sermon at lunch after church with their kids. They were engaged, right? So like the family was engaging together, as opposed to the kids hearing something cool at Sunday school, but they have nobody to talk to at home about it, right? So this is the thing, right? That's why I focus so much on the adults and saying, well, the adults, if they're on the right track, and it comes back to the very first thing I said, it's like, what kind of Christian are you? What kind of human being are you? What kind of marriage do you have, right? You show love to your wife, to your husband, right? What am I showing to my kids? What is normalized in the household, right? Do I pray? Do I openly pray? Do I do my cross when I drive in front of an Orthodox church or not? Because if I do it, then my kids will do it. If I'm ashamed to do it, then my kids will be ashamed to do it, right? All this stuff. They're always watching us, right? So this is the kind of the main emphasis that I would like to kind of leave you with, at least in closing, at least in this initial part. And before we go to Q&A, I did bring a few books to kind of recommend to you guys. Some of you might have already read some of them. Some of you might have not. Some of them are newer. Some of them are older. I have 4 books. One of them, have you guys seen this one? Parenting Towards the Kingdom by Dr. Philip Mamalakis. This one's a little heavier. It's a little deeper, but it's a really, really good book. Pretty easy to find on Amazon. It's by SVS Press, right? Dr. Mamalakis, he's really, really good. I've met him. And he has a lot of really good principles in here. So this is a good one. This is a secular book. It's called You Lost Me, Why Young Christians Are Leaving the Church and Rethinking Faith. It's basically, it's done by like a Protestant guy, but it's just like a lot of statistics and numbers, but like it's really good. It talks about like surveys that they've done, and from a wide range of different Christians, right? Not just Orthodox, but different groups. But the answers are all the same as far as what kids are seeing and why they're disengaging from the church. It's really, really good. I used a lot of this in my thesis as well. So worth a read. This is David Kinnaman. I can provide it to Peter too if he wants to provide the actual names and for the book. So you guys can take a look at them at the end too as well. This is another one you probably know, Blueprints for the Little Church by Alisa Bjelitic. Have you seen this one before? It's a wonderful little book. Alisa Bjelitic, she's a Serbian Orthodox woman. She's based out of Texas, I think. She's been on my show on my Fr.TEDTalks channel. So she wrote this book along with this other collaborator, Caleb Shoemaker. They're both Orthodox Christians. And this is a wonderful little book, not so little, but talking about how to help raise kids in the Orthodox faith. So like practical guides. How do you keep your kids engaged in the home and during divine liturgy and things like that? She's got like 6 kids or something like that. So she's gone through it quite a bit. This is called Blueprints for the Little Church, Creating an Orthodox Home. Really, really good. And the last one, which is a little harder to find, and it's expensive because it's out of print, but you can get it on Amazon. And this is but for me, this is like gold. I have had this since my seminary days. This is called Foundations for Christian Education by John L. Bujamra, he passed away. He was a professor at St. Vladimir Seminary in the 80s. This book is foundational. Nobody knows it. John L. Bujamra, right? Yeah, Antiochian, yeah. So, right? And he was phenomenal. He was so good. And he said all the stuff that we're saying now, he said it back in the 80s. Okay? This book, it is a little expensive because, as I said, it's out of print. It's like $56 to get this book on Amazon. But it's worth it because he talks in this book about like how the ancient church educated, how we do it today, why there are problems, and effectively what are we doing like when we're running Sunday school during liturgy, when we're dumbing down the faith for kids, we're not helping them at all. Like there's really, really good things in here. This is like probably out of all these books, it's my favorite. And it's the oldest one, right? So if you can find this book, it's excellent, right? Foundations for Christian Education. He says some hard truths in this one. Nobody wants to hear it, right? most modern youth programs they go against what he's saying here, and they don't work. Everything we've been doing for the last 50 years here in Canada hasn't been working, right? And he already identified the problems back then. Now, slowly, there's a small shift away from those kind of things. Some other resources to take a look at is, you all know Be the Bee? Steve Cristoforo. Okay, so he's a good friend of mine. So Be the Bee, Steve Cristoforo, who was the National Youth Director of the Archdiocese of America, and he had the show Be the Bee. So Be the Bee doesn't exist anymore, like it stopped. And it's interesting that Steve, he had an epiphany about this. So he stopped that show, not because it was bad, it was a wonderful program, but he's kind of shifted his whole thinking into like this new program that they've been piloting under the Archdiocese of America called ECM, Effective Christian Ministry. And basically they're moving away from this idea of, again, programs and institutionalism. He's like, we're institutionalizing our kids and our people into mentorship, into like a living experience of Christ in the parish, right? It's very, very, like it's cutting edge for us as Orthodox Christians, and he's doing like these online courses with it. I've taken some of them already, and they're really, really good. But he's really just going back to the ancient model of the church, right? He's going back to what like Pujamar said, things, right? But it took him a long time to kind of circle back and to realize that, yeah, you can do all these. They were doing the Bee treats, the Be the Bee retreats, all this kind of stuff. And he's traveling all over this country and all this kind of stuff and doing these things. He goes, yeah, this is great, but the problem still existed that programs are not going to, without mentorship, without the family, we're spinning our wheels. We're doing all this hard work. We're doing these conferences, doing all this stuff. In the end, nothing. Your kids are still leaving when they get older. So what's going on, right? So that's another really good resource. And I don't want to plug my own YouTube channel, but I am going to. Fr.TEDTalks. It's just like the TED Talks, just with an FR in front of it. I haven't been sued yet by TED Talks, but and I've had that channel for a while. But I've been doing a lot. Like I usually do, like there's a new episode every week on Sundays. It comes out when you're supposed to be in church. I'm not looking at it. They're usually like very short videos, like 10, 15 minutes. But there's a lot of practical stuff on there. So I've been focusing a lot. It used to be where I just answered religious questions people would email me, and I still do that. But then I have another series now called Faith in Action. And the Faith in Action series, if you look at those, they're specific, like practical guides to how to do stuff. Like, so how do I light a charcoal? It sounds stupid, right? People don't know how to light a charcoal and put incense properly. How do I build a prayer corner at home? People don't know how to do that, right? How do I make a pros photo? How do I, why is it important to be on time for church? How do I make oliva? Why do I bring this? When somebody dies, what do I do? Step-by-step guide. Like literally, when somebody dies now, I just send them a video. And they watch it. It says like, do this, do that, do that, do that. This is why we do this. Don't do these things because they're against our faith. Like, so very, very kind of clear cut to the point, step-by-step guides, right? So that's all there to have just practical guides on how do I do these things in my home? Like, because people don't know, right? So that's a resource too, Father TED Talk. So that's it for me. I'll end it there for now. Thank you.
Um,